The galaxy was wide, endless, and full of voices. Across the stars, thousands of civilizations lived, fought, and dreamed. But now, in a lonely sector where no traitor dared to pass, silence reigned. A silence heavy with despair. The Valari fleet drifted there, once a proud armada, now nothing more than broken wings in the void. Their ships had been built with shining silver hulls, shaped like crescents that glowed when near stars. They were called the Guardians of the Silver Path, feared in war and respected in peace. But pride meant nothing now. Their weapons were burned out. Their fuel was gone. Their engines coughed one last time long ago and never woke again. One by one, the great ships had gone dark. Power ran out. Life support systems weakened. The cold began to creep through the walls, making every breath painful. The Valari had fought bravely against their enemy, but the battle had been cruel and merciless. The survivors were not victors. They were stranded giants, left to wither among dead suns. Inside the command ship, Volantra, High Commander Seran sat in silence. His silver skin had lost its glow, and his once bright eyes were dim with exhaustion. Around him the officers whispered, but even their voices were weak. Hunger gnawed at them, and the emptiness of the void pressed against their hearts. For months, they had sent distress calls. Every cycle, every hour, the machines cried out into the void. "Help us, we are stranded. Please respond." But the galaxy did not answer. No ally came. No neutral ship even dared to look. The Valari were warriors, and to their enemies, they deserved to die. To the rest of the galaxy, they were already considered lost. On the lower decks, families huddled, together. Children who had never seen open skies asked their parents, "When will we go home?" Their parents could only whisper lies to comfort them. There was no home. Their empire had retreated far away, abandoning them to save itself. Commander. Seran listened to the soft sobs that echoed through the metal walls. Once he had promised his people glory. Now he could not even promise survival. His officers avoided his eyes, for they too carried the same shame. Many had begun to whisper that this was their end, that the Valari, proud children of the silver, stars would vanish here, nameless, forgotten in the void. The thought was too painful, but it was becoming truth, and yet, the signals still went out. Weak, broken, but still reaching. It was not reason, but instinct. Somewhere, deep inside their hearts, the Valari still begged the universe not to let them fade away. Seran stood and looked through the wide glass of his command deck. Before him stretched a graveyard of ships. His ships. The once mighty fleet that had carried the hope of millions. Now they looked like tombs floating in darkness. His chest ached with guilt, but also with stubborn fire. "We will not die silent," he whispered. "If this is the end, then let the stars remember we cried out until the last breath." The machines hummed weakly, sending one more desperate call into the endless dark. A call that no one expected to be answered, but far beyond, past the edge, of mapped stars, someone heard. A small exploration ship, carrying a flag no Valari had ever seen, caught the broken signal. Strange creatures with soft skin, fragile bodies, and curious eyes leaned closer to their consoles as the faint word "help" repeated in the static. They were humans, and unlike the rest of the galaxy, they did not turn away. On board the human exploration, ship Aurora, the silence of space was broken by a sudden sound, faint static echoing through the communication deck. The comm officer, Lieutenant Marin, frowned as she adjusted her headset. At first it seemed like random noise, just the universe's background whisper. But then through the broken crackle she heard it, a single word repeated again and again. "Help! Help!" Her heart froze. This was no random noise. It was a distress call. Captain Elias Torres was called to the deck immediately. He was a man hardened by years of duty, but even he felt a chill run down his spine as the signal was replayed. It was weak, fragmented, like the dying breath of a voice carried across endless stars. "Where is it coming from?" Elias asked. Coordinates. Locked, Marin replied, her voice heavy. It's far, Captain. Beyond mapped space, but it's definitely real. The crew exchanged uncertain looks. Humanity had only just begun its journey into the wider galaxy. Their colonies were young, their fleets small, their technology still fragile compared to the ancient powers said to rule far away. This was uncharted space, and stepping into it meant danger. But Elias felt the weight of the message pressing on his heart. Someone was out there, suffering. Someone had been calling again and again, and no one had answered. He looked at his officers. How long has this been repeating? Judging by the decay of the signal, Marin whispered, months, maybe longer. The crew fell silent. To think that for so long these cries had gone unheard. For so long someone had been left alone in the cold dark. A junior officer finally asked the question on everyone's mind. Captain, what if it's a trap? We've heard stories. Pirates, slavers, even hostile civilizations. If we go, we might never come back. Elias did not answer at once. He stood still, his dark eyes staring at the flickering console. In his heart, fear did whisper. What if it was a trap? Humanity was not ready for war. Their ship was built for exploration, not battles. And yet, could they ignore it? Could they turn away, knowing lives were at stake? Finally, Elias spoke, his voice steady, carrying both resolve and compassion. If it is a trap, then we'll face it. But if it is real, and I believe it is, then someone out there needs us, and we cannot call ourselves human if we let them die unheard. The crew looked at one another. Doubt lingered, but so did pride. They had joined the Aurora not just to chart stars, but to prove what humanity could be. Slowly, the fear began to shift into determination. The helmsman straightened. Captain, course is ready. Engage, Elias ordered. The Aurora turned, its engines flaring softly, leaving behind the safe paths of known space. The stars stretched, pulling them toward the unknown. Each heartbeat carried them farther, from home, deeper into mystery. In the silence of the journey, some wondered what awaited them. A broken ship? A forgotten people? Or perhaps ruins? Long dead? None could know. But Captain Elias carried a thought he did not share aloud. If we arrive too late, at least someone will know we tried. At least someone will know humanity heard the call. Days turned to weeks as the Aurora pressed forward. The crew grew restless, but the signal never faded. Broken, fragile, but persistent. It guided them like a thread of hope through the dark. And then, one cycle, the navigation officer shouted, "Contact ahead!" Through the glass of the command deck, the crew saw them, giant shadows drifting in the distance. A fleet of ships so large they blotted out the starlight, silent, lifeless, waiting. The humans did not yet know who they were, or what story had left them stranded. But as they drew closer, they felt the weight of destiny upon them. The cries for help had led to this moment. Humanity had arrived. The humans aboard Aurora had seen many strange sights during their travels, but nothing prepared them for the scene before them. A fleet, an entire armada, drifted silently in the dark. Their shapes were majestic, built like crescent blades with silver hulls, but they were wounded, broken, and quiet. No lights shone from their windows. No engines hummed with power. They looked like sleeping giants abandoned in the endless void. Lieutenant Marin whispered almost in awe, "How can ships this large be so silent?" Captain Elias Torres said nothing. He only studied the fleet through the glass view, his heart heavy. He could feel it. These ships were not empty. There were lives inside, waiting, suffering. The Aurora approached slowly, like a small bird circling around whales. By comparison, the human ship was tiny, fragile, almost laughable next to the alien colossi. And yet size meant nothing. It was not the mass of metal that mattered, but the beating hearts inside. As they drew closer, faint life signs appeared on their scanners. Thousands, no, Tens of thousands of souls still clung to survival within the dying fleet. The humans held their breath. On board the flagship of the alien fleet, the Volantra, High Commander Siran felt the slight tremor as the human vessel docked. His officers looked at him in disbelief. "It's so small," one muttered. "Scavengers," another spat bitterly. "They come to strip our bones." Siran himself was torn. His people had sent out cries for help for months. None had answered. Why would strangers come now? His eyes, once bright with pride, were dull with distrust. He expected betrayal, trickery, or pity disguised as kindness. When the airlock finally opened, the Volari warriors tightened their grips on makeshift weapons. But what stepped through was not an army. It was a single human. A young engineer named Thomas Hale entered cautiously, carrying not a gun, but a heavy toolbox slung over his shoulder. His boots echoed on the cold alien floor as he looked around nervously. He saw tall, silver-skinned beings with glowing eyes, weak but fierce, staring at him as if he were prey. He cleared his throat, his voice shaking but sincere. "We heard your call. We're here to help." The Volari warriors blinked, stunned. Help? They had expected demands or insults or perhaps silence, but this fragile-looking creature spoke only of aid. Siran narrowed his eyes. "Why?" His voice was deep, sharp with suspicion. "Why would you risk yourselves for strangers?" Thomas looked back at him, then at the starving families huddled in the corner, children wrapped in rags of cloth to keep warm. His throat tightened, but he spoke with courage. "Because no one deserves to die alone in the dark." For a moment silence fell. Even the hum of failing machines seemed to fade away. Siran felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he had not allowed himself to feel for a long time. Hope. The humans wasted no time. They began bringing in food supplies, water containers, and medical kits from the Aurora. Their engineers worked tirelessly, crawling through alien halls, studying unfamiliar systems, patching up what they could. They did not demand payment. They did not ask for surrender. They only gave. The Volari watched in disbelief. Children who had not smiled in months reached out to touch the strange warm hands of human doctors. Warriors who had once prepared to die now saw their engines flicker with life again. But doubt still lingered in Siran's heart. Was this real? Could it last? Or would these humans betray them when their guard was down? As he stood on his silent bridge, watching tiny human figures move among his broken ship, he whispered to himself, "Are they saviors or fools?" Only time would tell. But for the first time in many cycles, the Volari fleet no longer felt abandoned. In the endless dark, a fragile spark had arrived, small, flickering, but real. Humanity had come. The first days were full of tension. The Volari accepted the food and the medicine, but their eyes always watched the humans with suspicion. To the Volari, nothing in the galaxy was free. Every gift carried a hidden chain. Every hand that offered help wanted something in return. High Commander Siran walked the corridors of his ship, watching the humans work. They crawled into narrow ducts, repairing power conduits. They moved among the sick, offering strange but effective medicine. They gave water to children before drinking themselves. Siran's officers whispered behind him, "They are too generous. It must be a trick. Perhaps they plan to take our ships once they are repaired. Maybe they want to use us as soldiers in their own wars." Siran listened but did not answer. The doubt in his heart was heavy. The Volari had been betrayed before. Allies had abandoned them. Rivals had laughed as they starved. Why should these fragile creatures be different? Later, Siran confronted Captain Elias Torres on the command deck. The human captain stood firm, his dark eyes steady as Siran spoke. "Why?" Siran demanded. His voice was sharp, filled with years of pride and pain. "Why risk your lives for strangers? You know nothing of us. You know nothing of our wars. Why do you not leave us to die?" Elias did not flinch. His voice was calm, almost quiet. but each word carried weight. Because no one deserves to die alone in the dark. We may not know your history. We may not share your blood. But we share the same stars. And that is enough. The Valari officers scoffed at such simple words. But Saran felt something stir again in his chest. The same flicker he had felt when he first saw the humans. Could it be true? Could it be that some beings gave help without expecting chains? The days turned into weeks. Slowly, changes began to appear. On the lower decks, Valari children who once lay silent now laughed softly as human medics told them stories of Earth, of oceans that stretched endlessly, of green forests that sang with birds, of skies where the air was warm and full of light. To children who had only known the metal halls of warships, these stories were like magic. Valari engineers, though still proud, began to watch the human engineers closely. They marveled at how quickly humans adapted, how they learned alien systems, with stubborn determination. A human might make mistakes, but they never gave up. They are reckless, one Valari engineer admitted, but they are not cowards. Even Saran himself could not ignore the change. Each morning when he walked the decks, he saw his people's eyes brighter than before. Not full of despair, but carrying a fragile spark of hope. And that hope came from the humans. Still, doubt lingered. One night, Saran sat alone in the dark of his command chamber, staring at the stars. He whispered to himself, "What do they want? What is their price?" But when he walked the halls again, he saw a human nurse sharing her own ration of bread with a Valari child. He saw human engineers working through exhaustion, refusing to rest until air recyclers were stable. He saw Elias himself standing side by side with Valari officers, not as a master, not as a ruler, but as an equal. Slowly, the doubt began to weaken. One evening, Saran approached Elias again. This time his voice was softer, not sharp with suspicion, but heavy with honesty. "You confuse me, Captain. All my life I believed the galaxy to be cruel. Every ally we had demanded something in return. But you ask for nothing." Elias gave a small smile. "Then maybe it is time to believe the galaxy can be different." Saran stood silent for a long time. The words were simple, but they carried a weight his heart struggled to carry. For the first time in many cycles, Saran felt something he had not allowed himself to feel. Trust. And though it was fragile, it was real. The Valari were no longer completely alone in the dark. The Valari ships were slowly coming back to life. Broken, engines flickered with weak sparks. Power hummed softly in corridors that had been dark for months. With human help, food supplies were restored, life support was stable, and even damaged weapons were showing signs of recovery. For the first time, in many cycles, the Valari dared to hope. Families whispered that maybe, just maybe, they would survive. Children played again in the narrow halls, their laughter a sound no one thought they would hear again. But peace is fragile, and hope is always tested. It began with a warning from the Aurora's scanners. Lieutenant Marin's face turned pale as she stared at the screen. Strange shapes were moving in the distance, emerging from the black void like shadows with glowing eyes. "Captain," she whispered. "Multiple signatures detected. They're warships." Captain Elias Torres felt his stomach tighten. He didn't need to be told who they were. The Valari's enemy had returned. The ships grew larger on the screen, their hulls jagged and cruel, built not for beauty, but for destruction. Their weapons glowed with hungry light. This was the fleet that had struck the Valari down, leaving them stranded. They had come to finish what they started. On the Valari flagship, alarms blared. High Commander Saran stared at the approaching enemy with burning eyes. His officers trembled with despair. Their fleet was still too weak, too broken. Repairs had begun, but they were far from ready for battle. One officer turned to Saran, his voice shaking. "Commander, we cannot fight them. We are not strong enough." Another whispered, "It is over. They will destroy us all." Saran clenched his fists, his chest heavy with the bitter taste of failure. He had thought hope had returned, but now it seemed cruelly stolen. He turned to Elias, who stood calmly beside him. "You should leave," Saran said harshly. "Take your ship, take your people. Save yourselves while you still can. You owe us nothing." Elias looked at him, his face unreadable for a long moment. Then his voice came firm, steady, and full of fire. "Maybe we owe you nothing, but we owe ourselves this. We do not abandon those who depend on us." The Valari officers looked at him in shock. Was he mad? The Aurora was tiny compared to the enemy fleet. Humanity's presence here was nothing but a spark against a storm. Yet Elias spoke as though he carried a whole army behind him. Saran's heart twisted. Pride told him not to let another species bleed for his people. But deep inside he felt something he had not known in years: faith. Perhaps these humans were small, but they carried a strength unseen before. The enemy fleet drew closer, their weapons lighting the void with fire. The Valari's half-repaired ships shook as they prepared what little they could. Families huddled, together, children crying, warriors sharpening useless blades as if to fight death itself. On the Aurora, the human crew prepared as well. Their weapons were limited, their shields weaker than the enemy's, but their faces showed no fear. They checked their stations, tightened their belts, and whispered to each other words of courage. Lieutenant Marin's hands shook, but she steadied herself. "Captain." "Orders?" Elias's voice was calm, but filled with iron. "Hold the line. We fight, not because we can win easily, but because they cannot be allowed to fall. If we must die, then let it be protecting those who had no hope." The crew nodded, their eyes burning with determination. They were not fighting for glory or conquest. They were fighting for something greater: compassion. The void outside began to glow as the enemy charged weapons. The Valari braced for destruction, hearts heavy with despair. But between them and death, a small human ship and its fragile fleet stood firm. The predators laughed, mocking the tiny defenders. But the humans did not move aside. The shadows had returned, and humanity was ready to meet them. The void exploded with light. The enemy fleet opened fire, their weapons blazing like burning stars. Beams of energy streaked across the darkness, tearing through empty space as they aimed to crush the stranded Valari once and for all. But before the fire could reach, the Aurora moved. The small human ship darted forward, shields raised, standing between the broken Valari ships and the predators who hunted them. Inside the Aurora, alarms screamed. The crew held their ground, gripping their stations as the ship shook from the first impacts. Lieutenant Marin shouted over the noise. "Shields, at 70%. Captain Elias Torres kept his voice calm, even as his heart pounded. "Return fire. Target their weak points. Don't fight them where they are strong. Fight them where they think we cannot." The Aurora's weapons were smaller than the enemy's, but they were fast, precise, and clever. Shots burst from the human ship, striking the joints of enemy hulls, cutting through weapon mounts, and slicing at vulnerable engines. Where the enemy laughed at the human size, they soon learned to fear their accuracy. Still, the fight was brutal. For every enemy ship disabled, another came charging. The Aurora took heavy damage. Sparks rained down on the crew. Smoke filled the air, and yet no one abandoned their post. On the Valari flagship, High Commander Saran watched in shock. He had seen many battles, many warriors fall, but never had he seen such courage. These fragile creatures, so small compared to the vast fleets of the galaxy, fought like lions. One officer turned to Saran. "Commander, they cannot hold much longer." Saran's chest burned. Pride battled against fear. His ships were still weak, not fully repaired. But could he stand by while the humans fought alone? Could he allow them to bleed for Valari lives while his people hid behind broken walls? He slammed his fist against the console. "Power up what we have. I don't care if it's half broken. Get the weapons online. Today we fight beside them." The Valari engineers scrambled. Engines coughed, shields flickered, weapons sputtered, but they lit up. Slowly, painfully, the Valari fleet roared back to life. And then, side by side, the humans and Valari struck, back. The Aurora darted like a spark, weaving between enemy ships, striking with surgical precision. The Valari vessels, though wounded, fired their massive cannons, each blast shaking the void. Together, they became something greater than either had been alone. The enemy was stunned. They had expected easy prey, not resistance. They had expected silence, not fire. One enemy commander shouted over the comms, "They are ants, crush them." But ants, when united, can bring down giants. The humans fought without fear of death. When weapons failed, they rammed enemy hulls, sacrificing steel and fire for victory. The Valari, inspired by this madness, poured every drop of energy into their broken ships, refusing to yield. The battle raged on. Explosions lit the stars like falling suns. Ships shattered, debris scattering across the void. The humans lost. Vessels, lives burned away in flashes of light. But their courage did not falter. Each sacrifice made the Valari fight harder, their pride rekindled by human fire. At last, the tide began to turn. Enemy ships, crippled and burning, began to retreat. Their mocking laughter turned into snarls of fear. What was supposed to be a slaughter had become their humiliation. The predators fled into the dark, leaving behind wrecks and silence. Inside the Valari flagship, Saran stood tall, his glowing eyes wet with unspoken emotion. He turned to Elias, who appeared on the comm screen, his uniform torn, his face smeared with soot but his gaze still steady. "You fought for us," Saran said quietly. "You fought when no one else would. You bled for people you did not know." Elias gave a tired smile. "We fought because it was right. That is enough." The Valari commander bowed his head. Pride had once ruled his heart, but now gratitude filled it. Humanity had shown him something greater than power, something the galaxy had forgotten. Not fear, not conquest, but the strength of compassion. The battle was over, but in that silence after fire, something new had been born. A bond between two species sealed in courage and sacrifice. And though the stars around them still burned with danger, neither the Valari nor the humans felt alone anymore. The battle had ended. Silence returned to the void, heavy and strange after so much noise and fire. Smoke drifted through the empty space between the ships, and small fires flickered across the remains of enemy vessels. The Valari fleet was battered but alive. For the first time in months, the stars seemed quiet, not with death, but with relief. Inside the Valari flagship, High Commander Saran walked slowly along the main deck. His silver skin had lost its shine in the heat of battle, his pride bruised and reshaped by the events of the past days. Yet his eyes, glowing faintly, reflected something he had not felt in many cycles: hope. Families emerged from hiding. Children, holding hands with their parents. They had survived. They had seen courage where they least expected it. And they had learned that even in the endless dark, there were lights that refused to fade. Saran approached Captain Elias Torres. The human captain stood at the edge of the deck, surveying the repaired Valari ships and the scattered remnants of the enemy fleet. His uniform was torn, his face smeared with soot, but his eyes were steady, calm, and full of quiet strength. Saran's voice was soft, almost unsteady. "You gave us hope when we had none. You risked everything for us. Tell me, Captain, what do humans ask in return?" Elias shook his head. "Nothing. We ask nothing. You are alive. That is enough." The Valari commander felt the weight of those words, no payment, no hidden strings, nothing but pure compassion. It was a concept so foreign to him it almost hurt to understand. Around them, human engineers and medics moved through the fleet, repairing broken systems, helping the Valari crew adjust to life after months of despair. Children followed them, curiously, their eyes wide with wonder at the strange beings who had saved them. Saran looked out through the wide observation window. The void stretched endlessly, dark and cold, but now the silence was different. It was not the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of survival, of shared struggle, and of a bond forged in the fire of impossible odds. One of Saran's officers, still shaking from the battle, spoke quietly, "Commander, we owe them everything." Saran nodded. "Yes, but not in chains or servitude. In trust, in loyalty. That is how we repay them." Elias stepped forward. "Saran, when the galaxy sees this, when others see that small humans stood for what was right, they will remember. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy will learn that help does not need a price." Saran studied him for a long moment. Then slowly he extended a hand. Elias took it without hesitation. The touch was simple, human and Valari, bridging two species separated by centuries and stars. "You have changed us," Saran said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not through weapons, not through power, but through courage and kindness." Elias smiled. "Then let us remember this. Let it guide both our peoples. The galaxy is dark, but it does not have to be cruel." The Valari crews began to rebuild with renewed energy. Human engineers guided them, teaching new techniques, working together as equals. Ships that had been shadows of death now gleamed again, alive with light and purpose. And far beyond, other civilizations who had ignored the Valari before would soon hear the tale. They would hear of tiny humans who arrived when no one else would, who stood against impossible odds, and who taught even the proudest warriors that the greatest strength in the galaxy was not fear, not conquest, but compassion. Saran looked once more at Elias and the humans. "We will not forget this. Humanity, you have shown us what it means to be alive, to fight for what is right, to care for others when no one asks. You are true warriors of the stars." Elias's eyes softened. "We are all survivors, Saran. Today we survive together, tomorrow we stand together." In that moment, the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter. A new bond had been forged, unbreakable and eternal. The galaxy had witnessed the rise of hope, carried not by weapons, but by hearts willing to fight for the helpless. And somewhere deep in the vast expanse of darkness, humanity's light burned, steadily, a beacon of courage, a promise that no one would ever face the void alone again. The Valari had survived. Humanity had proven its greatness. And together, they were no longer just strangers in the galaxy. They were allies, friends, and a force that even the stars would remember. The universe had changed forever,